tell me about your favorite books. Welcome to the Left on Red podcast, where we talk about the books you love. I'm joined today by a very good friend of mine, Chris. How are you doing today, Chris?
Dude, I'm doing great.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I'm really excited to have you on the show. You are one of the first people I told about this podcast.
Cool.
And you seemed very excited about it. And we've been talking about doing an episode. But you and I have been a little busy with a little TV show called Modern Love, right?
Yeah.
So Chris and his wife have been coming over, and we've been watching Modern Love on Amazon Prime and just enjoying the heck out of it, right?
Yeah, my favorite part of it is after every episode, we'll kind of do what would you even call that? Like a post-mortem for the episode.
Yeah.
Where we go over what we just saw and how it affected us. It gets really funny a lot of the time.
It's a lot of trolling on my end.
Oh. I told you I wouldn't bump it, and there we are. First one.
We'll take care of it in post, but I actually might leave that in and just bring the bump down because it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Chris is a very smart dude.
Thanks.
First time I met you, I just got tons of gosh, I'm forgetting the word now. Plenty of good things to say about you from a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah.
But that was our introduction. And since then, I've had a lot of opportunity to talk to you because you and I are in the same field. Yeah. And I'm just blown away. Chris is a very brilliant guy. Plenty to talk about in our field, but also just in general, talking about books, talking about life.
It's because I'm not smart enough to know what I don't know yet.
Sure, a little Dunning-Kruger going on there. But either way, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing about this book. So, Chris, tell me about your favorite book.
So, my favorite book has got to be Plato and a Platypus Walk into a Bar. It's by Thomas Cathcart and Daniel Klein. I hope I'm not butchering their names. These are two guys that essentially they just graduated in philosophy and then they went off and did their careers and continued to think about philosophy, but not too seriously anymore. In fact, one of the guys, Daniel Klein, he wrote for, what is that called again? Candid Camera.
He wrote for Candid Camera.
Yeah, he designed stunts for Candid Camera.
Oh, that's cool.
For like several years. And so essentially the book is explaining a whole bunch of philosophical views and giving nice, succinct summaries of what certain philosophers, there it is again, what certain philosophers thought, like what were their main points, but it's not serious. It's not like a textbook. And especially, so I'm of the belief that semantics and just language in general can be explained best through jokes. This is the perfect book for me because it's all about philosophy, so all about thought, all about metacognition, all of it explained exactly how I want it to be through jokes. I love it.
What is the title getting at here? This Plato and a Platypus.
So, I don't know that the title's really getting into anything specific. As in, it's not referencing anything other than you have to know who Plato is. You know, he's one of the great Greek philosophers. You have to know that a platypus is like one of the most ridiculous animals on the planet.
Right.
So it's setting up a joke that you're never going to get the punchline to.
Uh-oh.
Plato and a platypus walk into a bar. And then like what can happen? Anything can happen.
Okay.
Right?
So what does happen?
So in the book, essentially, they've got these jokes. They've got their own commentary. They're talking about every single philosophical point you could imagine, like from epistemology to the philosophy of religion, the philosophy of language, metaphysics, like all of it. But throughout the whole book, and I'm going to show you this, they've got these two characters that they start and end every chapter. You've got Dimitri and Tasso. And those are those are, again, names that don't really mean anything, but they sound vaguely Greek.
Right, yeah.
So it's kind of playing on the fact that we get it from Greeks every time. And so it always starts with Dimitri is asking questions as a student to Tasso, who's the teacher, and every single chapter begins and ends kind of ridiculously, where they sum up what the chapter is going to be about and then make a joke out of it.
Okay. So with each chapter, are we looking at kind of like a survey of philosophy type deal where...
Yeah, it's a survey of one specific type of philosophy every chapter. So it's exactly what I was bringing up before with like all the stuff that they have. They start with metaphysics, but it's not discussing metaphysics. It's discussing the philosophy of metaphysics. So the first joke that they tell, it's really lame. Super, super lame. A lot of the jokes in here are pretty lame. Because they're just for discussing the philosophy of them. But it's the one where this is between Dimitri and Tasso. Dimitri's like, "Hey, Tasso, what's holding up the world?" And Tasso's like, "It's a turtle." He's like, "Right. And what's holding up the turtle?" And Tasso's like, "Another turtle." And Dimitri's like, "And what's under that turtle?" And Tasso's like, "Dimitri, it's turtles all the way down." And it's like, that's not funny. You know, it's like, well, that didn't answer the question. I don't really get a punchline in there. It's just like, hey, dude, there's no explanation for what you're asking, so stop asking it. And that's kind of where they start with the philosophy of metaphysics, which ties in perfectly with everything that they go over.
Sure. Well, wasn't that an explanation for the world at some point?
That's the Greek explanation for it. So they're I don't know, that's kind of what they do with all of it. They're going into it with like it's really tongue in cheek. All their humor is really tongue in cheek because it's like the Greeks actually believed this, but in essence it's because they really had a penchant for metaphysics. They really loved metaphysics, the Greeks did.
Yeah.
And so, of course, their worldview is going to be metaphysical. It's kind of like ours. Like if you ask the average American what they believe and why they believe it, it's going to be, on average, pretty postmodernist. But Americans won't necessarily identify that way. Some of them might take offense to that. But postmodernist philosophy has definitely influenced everyday American thought.
Sure.
And that's what they're getting at.
Sure. So we've used a bunch of terms so far that, I mean, for some of these, I barely understand them. And I'm sure, I have like my younger siblings might be listening to this, and I don't think they've ever heard, the term like postmodernism or things like that.
Sure.
So let's go back, because you had talked about the earth is being supported on the back of a turtle.
Yeah.
And that turtle's on top of another turtle. Mm-hmm. And this was the introduction to the chapter on metaphysics?
It's the introduction to the whole book.
Okay.
They call it philogagging because philosophy, so philo is love, sophos is wisdom, so philosophy, right? Love of wisdom, right? It's really, really just prideful, just really full of themselves. We love wisdom. It's great. So philogagging, you can see where that's going. It's love of gagging, love of jokes. And that's how they introduce the whole book, is with that super lame joke, just to introduce those characters and to introduce that this whole book is going to take everything that you have ever believed and everything that you might have heard someone else believe and just make fun of it. The whole thing is just a satire. It doesn't matter, because like we're both linguists. Yeah. We both like language. There's philosophy of language in here where they make fun of linguists, specifically just because of how linguists think and what linguists do.
I'm offended.
Yeah, you can be pre-offended. It's great.
Because it's going to happen when we get there, right?
Right, yeah.
Well, that sounds great. So I'm hoping that we'll talk about the philosophy of language eventually at some point, and then everybody at home can get offended alongside with me. But so what is metaphysics?
So metaphysics, it's just, meta means about, essentially. Mm-hmm. So like if you have metacognition, that's where you're thinking about thinking.
Okay.
turtles all the way down, right?
Sure.
It just keeps going down. So metaphysics are physics that define physics. Some people don't even think that they exist, but philosophers like them. So that's a really succinct definition of it. I want to find one of these jokes so we can talk about it.
Okay. It sounds like this is going to be a really nerdy episode. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Okay.
Super nerdy.
Gotcha.
So here's one. So metaphysics will involve things like the meaning of life or the meaning of health, the meaning of good. So what is defining our world for us, which that's what physics is, physical world,
Yeah.
So here's a great one from right out of that chapter. It's about whether the universe has a purpose, essentially. So a seeker has heard that the wisest guru in all of India lives atop India's highest mountain. So the seeker treks over hill and Delhi until he reaches the fabled mountain. It's incredibly steep, and more than once he slips and falls. By the time he reaches the top, he is full of cuts and bruises, but there is a guru sitting cross-legged in front of his cave. O wise guru, the seeker says, I have come to you to ask what the secret of life is. Ah, yes, the secret of life, the guru says. The secret of life is a teacup. A teacup? I came all the way up here to find the meaning of life, and you tell me it's a teacup? The guru shrugs. So maybe it isn't a teacup. Right? And then they have an explanation right here that this guru is acknowledging that formulating the telos of life, or the meaning of life, is a slippery business. Furthermore, it's not everybody's cup of tea. So it's like just full of dad jokes, but you get the essence there. Like that's the beginning of their portion on theology, which is part of metaphysics.
Okay.
Which is defining the world, defining the universe. What's the meaning of it? What's the secret of it? Any of that stuff. And they immediately just make fun of it, saying that like you can go to the ends of the earth and you're not going to find it. Because that's what metaphysical philosophers battle with. Does that make sense?
So it does. My question is that true?
But they're not getting into that, and I don't even know. Like I don't have an opinion on it.
Well, but I mean, they've made a claim, right? You'll go to the end of the earth and you won't find it, right?
Right.
Is that true?
Well, I don't know.
Because it sounds like they don't either. So I think it's interesting that they seem to be taking that position.
And that's one of the really fun things that I love about the book is they'll make these claims, like with this one, they make the claim that you won't find it, but then later in the exact same chapter they say, but well, maybe we've been taking them a little too seriously, and like give a nice little paragraph about the good portions of theology as well.
Sure.
So I don't know. From my perspective, it seems like they're representing it pretty objectively. It's just satire the whole time.
That makes sense. It sounds like a book that, it sounds like a lot of the jokes would go over my head, especially ones that are not explicitly like presented right at the beginning of the chapter with Dimitri and what's the other guy's name? Tasso. Yeah, if those guys aren't saying it, I'm probably not going to get the joke. It sounds like.
No, I guarantee you will. They set them up really well. Yeah. I'm trying to remember. Some of my absolute favorite jokes have come from this too, so they're not all bad. They have this. They're not all just like lame ones. They've got this chapter on the philosophy of religion, for example.
Okay.
Where they're talking about not belief in God. It's after that. I don't remember where it is. Oh, the airhead philosophy. That's a good one. But so in the philosophy of religion chapter, they go over this one joke, basically showing the philosophy of religion to be sort of hypocritical in the way that people live it. This is one of my favorite jokes, and I tell it even after this. By the way, I just want to tell you a little bit about how I discovered this book.
Yes, absolutely. Please.
Why it's important to me. So I found this book just like wandering through Barnes and Noble in 6th grade. So little like 11-year-old Chris is running through Barnes and Noble because my mom loves books, and so she would take us there for like a fun day or something. We'd get some bagels and some of the biscuits and junk from Lionhouse and head there. It was awesome. But I found this book, didn't get it the first time, but it like stuck in my head because it was so ridiculous, the cover.
Right.
I got it finally later that year after I turned 12, and I read it. And admittedly, the first time I read it, I did not understand like anything, but some of the jokes were funny. And so I would tell them and I would repeat them just because they were funny. It wasn't like explaining philosophy or anything.
Right.
But later I reread it again when I was like 16 and I started to get more. Does that make sense? So I've read it 3 times now, the whole book, and I still don't feel like I really get all of the ins and outs of philosophy.
Yeah.
But every time I reread it, I'm like, oh, hey, I now have life experience with this thing they're making fun of. So I now know that I can be offended.
Right. Yeah.
I like that. So this is one of those jokes. This is one that I read after I got home from my mission. And I don't know, do we talk about that on this?
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you explain just for anybody who doesn't know what you mean by that?
Sure. Okay. So I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Lots of people call us Mormons. And as a Mormon, a lot of the time you'll serve a mission. And so I did that. That's where you go to a place that's chosen for you. It could be anywhere. For me, it was Slovakia, and I stayed there for 2 years and talked to people about God there, and it was great.
Perfect.
But so when I got home, I read this joke, and I immediately felt a little sting of like being offended. But at the same time, I was like, I relate to this so much. It's great. So essentially, the joke's in Ireland, right? It's a Dublin bar where it takes place. This guy goes in and he sits down at the bar, and it's essentially a whole bunch of regulars there. He's the one newcomer. The bartender goes up to him and he's like, what'll you have? And he said, I'd like 3 beers. And the bartender's like, all at the same time? And he says, yeah, bring me 3 pints all at the same time. He's like, well, you know that they wouldn't, like, that's a bad way to drink. He's like, just do it. And so he brings in 3 pints and he drinks 1 sip from one sip from the next one sip from the third one. And the bartender waits the whole time. He's just a patient dude. So he waits the whole time until he's done. And then he's like, you know, the beer would not go flat and it'd taste a lot better. It'd be better for you if you just had them one at a time. It would be like a nicer experience. He's like, oh, but I have a brother in America. I have a brother in Australia. And before they left, we all promised each other that every time we go and drink, we would drink like this so we can be together as brothers. Right? And so he becomes a regular at the bar, and every time he comes in, he orders 3 beers. Everyone gets used to it. They like him. After a couple of years, he comes in and he only orders 2. Right. And everyone, like, you know, a pall falls over the whole bar. Everyone's just, they're wondering what happened. And so the bartender waits for him to finish. And then he's like, my condolences. I'm so sorry. And the guy's like, what? What do you think happened? And the bartender's like, well, you only ordered 2 beers. Like, one of your brothers must have died. He says, oh, no, my brothers are fine. I just joined the Mormon church, so I can't drink anymore. Right?
I should have seen that coming, and I totally didn't. Oh, that's hilarious.
And that's from this book. You know, it's great. It helps me not take myself too seriously. It helps me not take other people too seriously. I just love it. That's the main thing that I love about it, and that's why I would recommend it, you know, to anyone.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. And it's cool that you can, I can see, like, yeah, it makes sense why that might sting a little bit at first, but clearly it's not meant to be malicious in any way.
No, and none of it is.
And being able to, like, laugh at yourself, laugh at, like, the way that you view the world, and realize I don't have any better idea what's going on than anybody else, you know?
Yeah. That's what I really like about it, because it's not about, you know, saying this philosophy is right and this philosophy is wrong, or worldview is right or worldview is wrong. It's just about understanding all of them.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that really appeals to me.
Taking a step back and looking at what it is you're actually looking at, you know, because we have, like, these frames that we look at the world through, and sometimes we have to take a second and look at that frame instead of just looking at, you know, continuing to do things the same way. It's really funny that you say that the older that you get, the more times you've read this book, you've taken something new from it. Because in your case, it's very clearly makes sense why that would be true. Mm-hmm. Because if you read this for the first time when you're 12, well, I'm almost 30, and like I was saying, half of this is probably going to go over my head, right? So of course, like a 12-year-old would struggle with some of the jokes or things like that. But you are not the first person to come on this podcast and say that as you've read books, again, as you've gotten older, that you've taken more out of it. Like I just talked to a friend who read The Giver, and he said that The Giver was one where when he was a kid, he thought a lot about certain characters and certain things they did. And as an adult, he saw those things through a different light and kind of questioned them a little bit. And so
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Man, I feel like I could talk about that one too. That's a great book.
Yeah. Well, so I can't really think of a book that I haven't read a whole lot is the main problem here. I love stories, but I haven't consumed them in the literature format, right? But my little brothers, a couple years ago, I went home and they were watching SpongeBob. Mm-hmm. And, they're watching and they're laughing. And I'm starting to notice, I'm like, man, that SpongeBob guy's a jerk, man. He's, him and Patrick are kind of picking on Squidward. No, it's not meant to be a bad thing. They're like trying to play with Squidward. Yeah. But he's very clearly bothered by it. And I asked my little brother, I say, hey, who's the good guy in the story? And he goes, SpongeBob. And I was like, very interesting. Very interesting that you would see it that way.
Squidward clearly feels harassed in this relationship.
And he definitionally is being harassed, right?
And he communicates it too. It's not like he's silent.
No, very clearly. Leave me alone, leave me alone, SpongeBob. And he won't.
That's so sad.
Yeah. All right. But okay, so enough with the silly talk. Let's get back to Plato and the platypus.
As if that's not silly talk, right?
Yeah. No. So because they're covering philosophy of different topics, right?
Right.
Is there a topic that out of the however many times you've read them, in fact, how many times have you read the book?
Just 3.
3 times?
3 times.
Okay. Yeah. Out of those 3 times, what are maybe the section that has impacted you the most? Or maybe out of the 3 times, what are the different sections that impacted you as you read them?
That's a great question. I'm going to have to look here at the table of contents so I can
jog your memory.
Yeah.
We're going to read it a 4th time tonight, by the way. By the time you leave tonight, we will have read the whole book again.
Oh, awesome. So the first one that really impacted me at all was talking about social and political philosophy.
As a 12-year-old.
As a 12-year-old, yeah.
Okay.
And, well, all of us... essentially reading the jokes and recognizing that like, oh, hey, my parents say those things, but here's a joke about it. And that makes me think that maybe that's dumb. And then being like, hey, wait, I've actually said those things too. Is it wrong?
Maybe I'm dumb.
Maybe I am. Maybe. Yeah, seriously. And that was the first one that really made me start thinking. Like, there's this one joke in here that's absolutely fantastic to represent what I'm talking about. It's talking about New Age philosophy, or that postmodernism that I mentioned earlier that impacts American thought a lot right now.
Is New Age philosophy, this is the only experience I have with that term, is like just at the turn of the century, like online culture and people kind of being woke and talking about the Matrix a lot.
Not necessarily the Matrix, but yes.
Okay.
It's some people would call it snowflake philosophy. Some people call it millennial philosophy. There's
I haven't heard either of those terms.
A lot of derogatory terms for it. It's not popular with people that are in power very much. And I think that the main reason for that is that the basis of postmodernism, like really, really unfairly summed up, is going to be that you need to question not just authority, but you need to question sources of information. Mm-hmm. That not everything that you hear, not everything that you see can be true just because it came from an authority figure. So like if a celebrity tells you to buy something, that doesn't mean anything because the celebrity is just a normal person.
What's funny about that is I was a kid at the turn of the century, and I remember teachers always talking about academic sources. Mm-hmm. And we were, always using the Google and,
Yeah.
and they were kind of like comparing that to like Ask Jeeves and things like that. And they were emphasizing so
Jeeves.
much. Well, I remember, clearly not the best source, but I remember teachers would emphasize a lot of like .orgs and .govs are good sources of information. So just like, as you're talking about, this kind of, I guess it's an authoritative kind of appeal.
Or questioning authority, yeah.
Yeah, and questioning the sources or organizations that are providing the information. It just seems really relevant to that period of time.
It is, and that's one of the fun things about it is because. So let me tell you the joke real quick. It's how many New Age philosophers or how many postmodernist philosophers does it take to change a light bulb? Think about it. How many?
I'm gonna guess that it's none.
Why? You're exactly right. So the punchline of the joke is none. They would start a coping with darkness support group.
Oh no. Okay.
And that's what I'm saying. It's like, I don't know, subscribing to that way of thought right now, in a lot of ways, that joke was immediately a little bit offensive to me, but not in like I'm going to change my worldview because of it. They're just pointing out that it's funny because sometimes there is just a solution of just like change the light bulb. You don't have to live in darkness all the time sort of deal. Yeah. And they're oversimplifying it. And that's the point, is to just get down to exactly what is the basis of it instead of trying to represent it completely from the ground up, because you need a lot of background knowledge for that. But if you can make fun of it, then you can generalize a lot easier.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's funny. So that joke for me, it doesn't, strike any negative chords. But I remember a lot of jokes back in that time period that were similar, that they like kind of played on stereotypes.
Oh yeah.
I'm not assuming that Plato and a Platypus is full of like problematic jokes, but that one just like really it took me back to that time period.
Oh yeah, and that's something that they discuss a little bit is what's the difference between a stereotype and a prototype. So a stereotype is something. Oh shoot, I'm gonna get my definitions weird here, aren't I? So
I have no idea. I was about to ask you what the difference was, because
I'll start with a prototype because I actually know that one.
Okay.
So a prototype is the first thing that people think of in relation to a term. Okay. So if I were to say dog, you're going to have a prototypical picture of a dog pop into your head. That could be, it could be a Cocker Spaniel. It could be a Golden Retriever. It doesn't matter. You're going to have a specific dog that comes to your head, and that's your prototypical dog. Okay. So that's a prototype. It's the first thing in relation. A stereotype is just a general thing in relation. So, and that's something that they try to get into. Like with that joke, they're getting into the prototype where, I don't know, a lot of people have negative feelings about millennials. And so, of course, the prototype of the millennial is going to be negative. It's not severely negative, and it even if you do feel a little bit of a twinge from that, you shouldn't feel like terrible from the joke. You shouldn't change your worldview because of it. So you shouldn't actually be offended by the joke, even if it is slightly offensive, because it's just playing on prototypes. It's not playing on the stereotypes. So there are no jokes about race in here. There are no jokes about, there are a couple of jokes about gender because it goes over feminist philosophy. And they're kind of tasteful. Let me see if I can find one real quick. Okay, here's one. So the first joke they have here is for feminism is, here's a riddle that has baffled people for decades. It's a man witnesses his son in a terrible bicycle accident. He scoops up his boy, puts him in the back of his car, and races to the emergency room. As the boy is rolled into surgery, the surgeon says, "Oh my gosh, it's my son. How is this possible?" Duh, the surgeon's his mother. Right? It's like not even, and it says today not even Rush Limbaugh would be puzzled by this riddle, so they even call some people out by name. That's pretty funny. The number of female MDs in this country is rapidly approaching the number of male MDs, and that's a result of the power of late 20th century feminist philosophy.
Okay, yeah.
And they go on to talk about it. So like I'm saying, they're addressing a topic that could potentially be really, really sensitive and offensive to a lot of people. Like it's a hot button issue, but they don't tell jokes about it in like a bad way. Or here's another one. Two gay men are standing on a street corner when a gorgeous and shapely blonde strolls by in a low-cut, clingy chiffon dress. Do you know what chiffon is?
Nope.
Chiffon?
Oh, it's a material.
I don't even know what that is. Did I say it right? Chiffon?
I think it's like a French word.
Chiffon?
Yeah.
Chiffon?
Yeah.
Oh, great. So two gay men are standing on a street corner when a gorgeous and shapely blonde strolls by in a low-cut, clingy chiffon dress. Says one of the men to the other, "At times like this, I wish I were a lesbian."
I'm sorry. I didn't catch it. I didn't get
That's
it.
fine. Two gay men are standing on the street.
Right.
This really pretty blonde walks by, and one gay man says to the other, "At times like this, I really wish I were a lesbian."
Okay.
The reason being that they've conflated the idea of gender with like liking a certain other gender.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it's like not necessarily a funny joke in this case. It's just illustrating what gender roles are, or like the prototypes of gender roles. So a prototype of a gay man right now is to like other men, right? Prototype of a lesbian is to like other women. So a gay man saying, "I wish I were a lesbian," he's just saying, "I wish I liked women."
I get it. So if he's saying because he's gay, if he were a woman, then he would like women.
Right.
Okay.
And so
I totally missed it. I thought they were just getting at the whole like, it's, I mean, back in middle school, people would just say like, "Oh, you like girls, so you're a lesbian." And they like, the joke was that that's not how it works. But this one like went to another level that I just couldn't understand because I'm still stuck in 7th grade.
There's another this is another really good one that maybe you could use this instead of the last one. If that, I don't know if that one was funny. It's just to illustrate like feminist philosophy and how like part of feminist philosophy, it has nothing to do with women. It's just the fact that everyone deserves an equal chance at things.
Right.
Everyone deserves equal treatment, like no matter the context. And
right.
I agree with that. And so they're trying to dive into the questions about like, are gender roles actually just social stereotypes, or like, is it real? Is it not real? They're trying to bring up the questions so that you'll actually just think about them. They're not trying to influence you one way or the other. But there's another joke from here that I've been telling my whole life that I learned when I was 12, and I thought it was really funny. So there's this cowboy. He's sitting in a bar, and this lady walks up to him. And she's like, "Are you a real cowboy?" And he's like, "Yeah, I am. I get up in the morning and I rodeo the cows, and I round them all up, and I don't know, I do all my cowboy chores."
He sounds like a cowboy so far.
I wear my boots.
I wear my cowboy boots and
wear my cowboy boots, and I
eat my cowboy breakfast.
Right, and I wear my cowboy hat, right? And she's like, "Well, I'm a lesbian, and every day I wake up in the morning and I think about women, and when I take a shower, I think about women, and when I go to bed at night, I'm thinking about women." And then, yeah, you probably know where this joke is going. She leaves, a couple walks into the bar, and they're like, "Are you a real cowboy?" And he goes, "Every day of my life I've thought I was, but today I think I learned I'm a lesbian."
Right.
As if it's mutually exclusive. It's not. You can be a cowboy or a cowgirl and lesbian. You can be whatever you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really fun to just, like you said earlier, to take a step back and not take things too seriously, just so that you can really think about them. So you can really figure out, where are my values? Are there things that I'm thinking about that are wrong? I like it. I think that whole questioning game is pretty fun.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. This has been fantastic so far. So many jokes, a couple that, as I predicted, went over my head at first. But thank you so much for explaining it, because that makes the joke so much funnier.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
But Chris, let's take a break real quick.
Cool.
And then we'll come back and keep talking about Plato and Platypus.
Great.
All right, we're back. And right before we left, you were kind of talking about like this book pokes fun at people.
Yeah.
It pokes fun at real people.
Yeah. Pokes fun at everyone. Literally all of us.
Yeah. But it's not poking fun in a way that's meant to offend, but it's just saying like, look, I'm not saying that you're dumb because of this identity that you have. I'm just poking fun at the fact that you take it so seriously.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there are ways in which you take yourself seriously that need to be poked fun at?
Oh, geez. Yeah. So one of my strongest held beliefs is in descriptive linguistics. And that's something that we've had conversations about.
We've had plenty of conversations.
Yeah, we don't agree about that. We don't agree about descriptive linguistics being the best form of linguistics, being the only form, any of it. And that's actually one of the reasons I really like you as a friend is that we can disagree about stuff and move past it and just continue being friends. Or we can even debate about it and neither of us takes it personally. The reason I bring that up is because that's exactly how I like this book is like it's poking fun at you and you can't really debate with a book. You know what I mean? It's not going to reply to you. You're not going to convince it.
But I can go on Twitter and at the author of whatever book I'm upset about,
I mean,
right?
Yeah, you can. You can email them directly. I'm pretty sure there are emails in the book. But the point of it is to try to, it's like you said, it's to try to invoke the scientific method, essentially, in you, which is especially ironic because they have a whole chapter on the philosophy of the scientific method and science. Mm-hmm. That's actually where that cowboy joke is from. It's from the inductive reasoning.
Okay, yeah.
They're making fun of the fact that the cowboy, through induction or, discovery, has discovered that because he matches all of the criteria of a lesbian, that he is now a lesbian.
Yeah.
And it's making fun of the scientific method in a way that a lot of scientists might. I mean, I personally am not a scientist, so I don't know how a scientist would respond. But I feel like it would be similarly to the way that I respond to the chapter on language, being a linguist, because he talks about descriptive linguistics, he talks about prescriptive linguistics, he talks about philosophers talking about linguistics, and I love all of those discussion points. One of my favorite parts of that is how he starts it, where well, I shouldn't say he, there are two authors, where they talk about Wittgenstein.
I don't know who that is.
Ludwig Wittgenstein.
I thought you were going to start at Wiccan, and I was very interested in that conversation.
No, so Wittgenstein was a professor at Oxford University. He's one of the original philosophers of language. And the funny thing that he brings up is, and the reason I call this funny, have you ever heard of the fallacy of equivocation?
Yeah.
Yeah. So where you are essentially using two definitions of the same word in order to equivocate two things. Well, you're using the same word, but using different definitions and saying that it's still the same. I'll give you an example right now. Like if I were to say that man is the only rational animal, therefore women cannot be rational.
Exactly.
Because they are not men. I'm using man in one definition in the first part.
And the first definition is?
People.
Right.
Mankind, as in any person in people.
Perfect.
People are the only rational animals.
Right.
And therefore women, because they are not men, cannot be rational. If I put it in that context, all of a sudden it's nonsensical. And it's not true either. It doesn't make like a sense. But that's essentially what Wittgenstein was saying all language was. So whenever people were coming across problems in philosophy, like really problematic questions, like what does I believe in God mean?
Uh-huh.
What they're saying is actually, what Wittgenstein says is that's actually a fallacy of equivocation. Because we're taking belief in one sense, when really believe means like, when I comprehend the cosmos, I get tingly feelings. And that's what I believe in God means.
Okay.
It's just an equivocation. And so they poke fun at that, because in our world right now, the way that we understand language is completely different than what he was talking about. And he sounds really wrong in that light. But there are people that still subscribe to that. And so that's why they poke fun at it.
Sure. I mean, you've already outed me as a prescriptivist, right?
I'm sorry if that was your prerogative to come out when you wanted.
No, but even being on on this side of that position, listening to Wittgenstein, say like, when you say this, you mean that, sounds like a fallacy to me. It sounds like a straw man fallacy.
Even though that's part of the basis of prescriptivism, right?
Well,
I might be wrong there, so correct me if I'm wrong.
It's more of you take a language out of time, because languages exist in time, and when you do prescriptivism, you're just saying like you're essentially operating on a release cycle of language.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you're saying like, at this point in time, the language means this, and you're not allowing for a new kind of release of that language to update your iPhone.
Until it comes naturally.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, I get that.
Well, I mean, I think some prescriptivists, like, the worst prescriptivists are like grammar Nazis, right?
Oh, dude, I've got some relatives.
Yeah, and those are the kind of people that even if it does change naturally, they won't accept it, because the real English is the one that came out in like 1930, right?
Or sometimes they'll learn a newer, older definition of something, and immediately, every time anybody uses that word, it's like, oh, wait, no, that's not what it actually means, because here's what it meant when Shakespeare used it.
Right.
Or here's what it meant when Beowulf used it. Or here's what it meant when Chaucer,
Right.
Just kind of that ridiculous mindset.
Yeah. It's like they let the dictionary be the last, and final say on what a word means when
the dictionary is just a record.
Something else. Yeah. But anyway, when I hear you talk about, Wittgenstein, saying like, this is what you mean when you say that, I don't think that's, and I know that you've given me kind of like a, what's it called? Spark Notes, like version of his philosophy. But I don't, what I'm saying is that you're right. Like we understand language from the future, essentially, in comparison to what he had available.
Let me tell you the joke that he talks about with this, where in this fallacy of equivocation, there's a longer one, but here's one where he says, Freddie, I hope you live to be 100 plus about 3 months. And Freddie says to Alex, thank you, Alex, but why the extra 3 months? He says, I wouldn't want you to die suddenly. Which, it's like, that's not going to change it. Just because you change the
I'd
date
rather you
doesn't-
suffer for 3 months.
Yeah, exactly.
3 whole months.
Where he's all of a sudden decided that, like, dying on the day that you turn 100 equals sudden. And so you have to wait an extra little bit. And that's exactly what he's poking fun of. And that's something that a lot of people still believe. And I feel like maybe even I have been guilty of that earlier in life, where, I don't know, when I'm trying to think of a good example. When somebody has said something to me, I have corrected them and said, do you know what that word means? And it has nothing to do with the way that they actually meant it, or the context that it was put in, or any of that, or the current definition even. I've corrected them when I really shouldn't have. And I've tried not to do that after I've learned more about it and shaped my view of language. But that was something that I feel like the book actually helped me change about myself, because I started asking the questions about it when I was 12. Even I like to think I might have been, brewing the question in my head even before I understood it.
Sure.
But yeah, that's essentially what I'm trying to say is like it. I don't know. It influenced my development in the way that I saw other people.
Very interesting. So how do you see other people?
I try to see them the same way that I see myself. I don't always succeed at that. But the way that I see myself is that, like, I don't really know what I'm doing a lot of the time. And I don't think a lot of people really do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know all the answers. I don't even think I know half the answers for the questions that they bring up. Like, what is the meaning of life? You know, we talked about that Indian guru. He thinks it's a teacup. Freaking, if life was a teacup, I could have had that. I could have had it solved a long time ago. You know?
Oh, maybe it was something else. That punchline got me. It was hilarious.
Yeah, and it's that's why I love it, is because it's like I actually have thought about that, and I don't know. I don't even know if I thought about it before I read it in the book, but all of a sudden it's like, well, dang, what did I think the meaning of life was before? And now I definitely don't know.
Right. Like, what did you expect?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, what's funny when you say, so it's, I didn't mean to like entrap you or anything when I asked you, how do you see yourself? Right.
Yeah.
But what's funny about that is if, you know, the way that you use like, well, I see myself this way, right? You can't see yourself the same way you see other people. Because like, for example, I'm looking at you right now.
Right.
In a way that I could look at any other person if I had the opportunity. I could never see myself physically, like literally in the way that I see you right now, right?
Yeah.
I maybe it's the book that has me kind of thinking on this meta level right now.
That might be. So, yeah, this is it. You just reminded me of this. It's one of the jokes again, where this is in the philosophy of language, where they're kind of making fun of the certain feelings that we have attached to words. And as a prescriptivist and as a descriptivist, this is actually one of the things that I know that we agree on.
Okay.
Is that like meaning and feelings attached to meaning are not the same thing. And so when you say certain things to certain people, it will bring up feelings that wouldn't happen in other people. And it has nothing to do with the actual word itself. The word is irrelevant. It's what the word means to them. So I'll give you a good example. There's the word retard.
Okay.
You know, for a lot of people, that's extremely offensive. And for probably about the same amount of people, that's not offensive at all. In fact, it's kind of funny. And right. I'm not 100% sure which category I fall into, but I know that like if I'm looking for an insult to call someone, I usually won't say that word because I know that it can trigger people. It has the potential to.
Yeah, so I would say my personal position is that that word doesn't hurt me. Understanding like what, for example, the definition of that word would be. However, knowing that it hurts other people, I absolutely would not use it. Right.
Yeah. And I think back to when I was more cavalier about it, like before I was a teenager and even as an early teen, that was like a go-to word for me.
Yeah.
And I think about the first time that I encountered someone who really was not amused by that, and it was like, whoa, they have completely different feelings about that word. And I remember feeling really, really weird about them trying to convince me that I should have the same feelings about that word as they do. And that's kind of what this joke is about. I'm sorry, that's kind of like a somber intro to a joke.
I mean, you know, it caught me a little off guard, but like it's important to talk about it. Right. You know? Yeah.
So this is the joke. There's a man named Garwood. He goes to a psychiatrist where he complains that he can never get a girlfriend. And the psychiatrist is like, no wonder, you smell awful. And Garwood says, you said it. It's because of my job. I work in the circus. I follow the elephants around and I clean up their droppings. No matter how much I wash and shower, the stink sticks to me. And so the psychiatrist, of course, says, quit your freaking job. Go get another one. And he's like, are you crazy? And get out of show business?
Again, this one, I don't
even feel like it went over your head. I don't.
I'm just thinking too hard about it.
It's not even really funny. It's just showing that he has this specific idea about what show business is.
Yeah.
He's got feelings attached to it that probably no one else in the entire world have. You know, like his idea is that because I work for the circus, even though I'm not performing, I'm cleaning up elephant poop, That's show business.
I mean, he's not wrong.
And show business gets me a girlfriend.
He's wrong.
He is wrong. He's super wrong. And that's what I love about it is anyone who hears that joke can see he's absolutely wrong. It may not even be funny. Like, I didn't think that was funny the first time that I read it, but I really love how it illustrates exactly what we were just talking about, that people attach these feelings to certain words, and then sometimes those feelings are like ridiculously positive instead of more serious.
Yeah.
Like with him in show business. Or there's this person I know that really loves the word absquatulate. I thought it was a fake word.
Yeah, lies.
I thought it was a fake word. It's from like steamboat era America.
Okay. Makes sense.
And it means to like leave in a hurry.
Absquatulate.
Absquatulate.
That's one of those situations where the form of the word does not match its meaning.
Right? Right. So yeah, and they like love that word. They think it's so funny and they use it really often. And I don't know anyone else who's attached the same feelings.
This reminds me of the first.
They get frustrated all the time when they say it and it doesn't get the reaction that they were hoping for.
Of course,
they think it's so funny. Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me of the first time I heard the word braggadocious.
Braggadocious.
Yeah, I thought it was a fake word.
You'll have to tell me what that means. I don't even know.
The root of that word is like brag, like
was it like
to be like puffed up. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Dang.
Very proud. You know what? I'm gonna look it up. Because if I'm wrong, I'm just going to cut this part of the podcast out. Braggadocious. Boastful or arrogant?
There you go.
Yeah.
And there's this other person that I know. It's actually my father-in-law. He's got this thing. He's a super efficient guy. And he really doesn't like it when people tack on extra stuff to words. Like he says that you should always use the word use. You should not use the word utilize because they mean exactly the same thing. And utilize is just longer and sounds a little fancier.
I'm going to utilize irregardless of what he says. Nice.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me of a great conversation I had the other day. Someone was talking about boy, the word from
which one?
BOI.
Yeah.
My longest boy ever. So somebody was asking on Reddit about what type of word that was, like what word class does it fit into, and essentially it was narrowed down that it was a noun, like it's a regular noun, usually used in a plural sense, but they had thought that it was some sort of classifier, like a what are those called? Unitizer. He thought it was a unitizer, like a gallon of milk or a pound of cheese, where you're putting something into a unit and keeping it there. And so I immediately thought, I'm gonna start using boy as a unitizer now. So instead of saying spicy boys, I'll say 4 boys of spice.
Get out of here right now. Get out of here right now.
Oh, no. I should leave after that. That's pretty bad, but I thought it was so funny. I was like, what in the world? Why would you think that? And yet, my gosh.
So I understand like where his thought process. That's one of those things where it's like, you think it out for a little bit, you write out your sentence, you draw your tree, and then you go, no, I was wrong.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I mean, why does he have to be wrong? I'll make him right.
I mean, I don't know. So sometimes you can like consciously create a usage in a language. But I just prefer things that arise naturally,
Right, yeah. I get that.
Yeah. I mean, any additional thoughts on linguistics? Sounds like this book has been rather formative on your linguistic position and personal philosophy, right?
I actually do have a lot of thoughts. So one thing that I really love that they do is the authors of the book, Plato and a Platypus Walk into a Bar, really fantastically attribute all of the ideas that they're bringing up. if there's no one to attribute it to, they won't. But especially in this philosophy of language section, whenever they're attributing different philosophies, they tell who came up with it and why. So like when they go over the Sapir-Whorf theory, they talk about both Sapir and Whorf, which you know the Sapir-Whorf theory.
I'm familiar with Sapir-Whorf theory, but let's go over the linguistic theory for those listening.
So this is the theory of linguistic relativism. Essentially, the theory says, it states that your language creates your world. Not the world can be influenced by your language, not your language can change the world. It's your language creates the world. The reason this is significant is because that means that, for example, an English speaker, because English has no future tense, it has the tense, but it has no future conjugation for its verbs.
Okay.
That it is therefore harder for English speakers to think about the future than it would be for, say, a French speaker, where there are several different ways you can express future tense.
I don't think that's entirely wrong.
I don't think it's entirely wrong. However, it has been discredited many times over the last 100 years.
So when you use the phrase, for example, that your language creates your world, that's a very broad and bold statement that I think is easily discredited. But I do think that the words that you use impact the way that you view the real things in the world, right?
And see, that's going to be a linguistic objectivism, because like what we talked about before, we all have specific feelings that we attach to the words that we use. So of course, the words that we use are going to reveal something about how we think about things. They're going to, in a lot of ways, we call them expressives in pragmatics. They're going to attach new feelings to different things. So like if I really love the word fantastic and I use that to describe something else, that has the potential to attach the same feelings of fantastic to that other thing. That's objectivism, where your language can influence your world, but it doesn't create it. Does that make sense? So one of the
I think maybe it's like a spectrum thing where
most things are like a spectrum.
Yeah,
thing,
I mean, what I'm getting at is like I'm comparing the way that somebody views a world to the spectrum of light. Right. Where like somebody's experience might have their spectrum leaning more towards a blue end, and to another person more towards a red end, even though they're able to see the same things, they just see it in a different hue, right?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. So in order for me to represent this objectively, like the authors in the book, here's some evidence for the Sapir-Whorf theory. There are several languages in New Zealand and Australia, like Aboriginal languages, that are really, really cool that I strongly recommend that people look into. I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head, so that's going to be a little harder. But if you find this, like if you just look up this story, it's going to pop up. Okay. One of these languages, well, several of them have no relative directions or relative placement in them. And what that means is they don't say left, right, straight, backwards, next to. They don't say stuff like that. They only use the cardinal directions, so north, south, east, and west, and degrees between them. So instead of saying, "Oh man, you're sitting too close. Can you move more to the left, or can you scooch over?" They would say, "You're sitting too close. Can you move to the west?" Or whatever direction away from me is. Right. What that's done is it's framed the way that they think about direction. So that even if you take members of these speaking communities outside of the place where they normally live and just put them in a place where they've never been before, they can still tell which way is north, south, east, and west.
Oh, and that's pretty cool. Yeah.
And that's one evidence for the theory, that because they express direction in a certain way, they then are more attuned to the cardinal directions just because they use them all the time.
I mean, so I agree. I think I am no expert. Like I talk about linguistics, but I do not consider myself an expert on like formal linguistics. Okay. I think that serves as an evidence of the Sapir-Whorf theory, right? However, if I just compare that to like
I'm going to jump in real quick. Yeah. We've been talking about this wrong, actually. It's a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It's not even No, it's not you. I said it first.
You're right. I would have called it a theory if you weren't here.
Okay. So yeah, it was never formally put into a theory because it was never proven in multiple hypotheses.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Okay, so I had talked about like a spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say that I had never seen the color blue. So even if I saw it, I would have no reference under which to identify that in my reality, right?
Actually, there's a great story about that.
A great story about seeing the color blue for the first time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's So it's Homer. Do you know who Homer is, right?
Yeah.
He wrote the Iliad, he wrote the Odyssey.
Right.
It's a really famous Greek. Homer reportedly almost died because he was drinking ocean water instead of wine, because Greek at the time that he lived didn't have a concept of the color blue, which is weird because like they had the same sky that we have, They had the same ocean, but for him, he described the ocean as being wine dark.
Sure.
And so for him, for whatever reason,
he drank ocean water instead of wine
and thought that it was his wine and almost died from it. Isn't that nuts? This is another evidence of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I just can't help to think that I wouldn't imagine that wine and ocean water taste similar.
No, and I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't even think they look similar. So I have trouble even
but you
imagining.
And I have, Roy G. Bev, right?
Yeah, we have experience not just seeing the color blue, but describing that as a separate color from other colors it might be, like purple or, dark red in the case of Homer, or maybe green in the case of like a lot of African languages.
Do they not have the color green? Well, I mean, I guess if you live on the Sahara, you might not see it a whole lot. There's some
really famous examples of this with African languages where they don't have blue and green to them are the exact same color.
Yeah. I mean, you see this sometimes in polls in the U.S. where they give you like a color in between the two, and people feel very strongly about
that it's one and not the other. Like specifically one and not the other.
Right, yeah.
They'll get in arguments about it. And that's one of the cool things is we've been able to identify that the tribes that think that it's not just tribes, I shouldn't call it that. So these languages that don't have specifically a color for blue, it's blue and green together. And you can Google this. There's this fantastic little test they have for it where there are 10 squares in a circle, just like positioned in a circle.
Yeah.
And one of them is blue and the other 9 are green.
Uh-huh.
And it's like they can't figure out which one is the blue one. But then they do the exact same test on English, not specifically English speakers, but on other languages that do have a concept for blue and do have a separate concept for green, where they have 10 circles again. And 10 squares arranged in a circle. And one of those squares is a different shade of green, that for the languages that differentiate between them, it is an extremely clear difference. And all of them see it with no problem. Right. But I've done this test myself and I could not tell which one was different.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy to me.
Yeah. I mean, so this makes me think of, I just watched, I think I've showed you this. You know, the guy that plays piano over like meme videos?
Yeah.
So his name is Charles Cornell. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Cool.
And he did a video the other day talking about perfect pitch. And he said, people have these misconceptions about what perfect pitch is. And for those who haven't heard of this, it's just when somebody has the ability to hear a sound and associate it with a musical note.
Yeah.
Like they have the natural ability to just instantly hear a sound and say, that's this note, right? Mm-hmm. And he says, a lot of people think that it's like this weird genius thing, or they just think all these different crazy things about it. He says, having perfect pitch is like when you look at a color, you go, oh, that's purple. You don't have to do any math. You don't have to think about it. You're not like doing advanced algorithms to understand that it's purple. You just see it and it's purple. It could not be anything else. And for people with perfect pitch, it's the same way. They hear a sound, they're like, that's a C. And it wouldn't even be logical for me to say that it was anything other than that, right?
Yeah.
And so, for you and me, we can see colors and it wouldn't be anything else. But for, us normies who don't have perfect pitch, we hear a sound and we're like, that's a sound. but I don't know, which sound it is maybe. And for societies where they don't have this concept of green being differentiated from blue, or purple being differentiated from blue. Sounds like blue is kind of a problematic color
it's
here.
It's a harder one. Yeah.
That would make sense. The thing I was kind of getting at earlier, where like if somebody had never seen the color blue, what do you do with it? I'm kind of talking about you and me, where we don't have this this strong sense of what is the north, south, east, west
cardinal direction.
Is that cardinal direction?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, as being compared to relative direction. For those of us who don't have that sense like readily available to us, it doesn't make sense. But for these, I guess these communities that speak languages where cardinal direction is used in that way, they would have a very strongly developed sense of cardinal direction. What I'm trying to get at is that you and I may have the ability within us, and we've just never used it, so we don't know how to access it. And my one kind of additional piece of evidence to say that might be the case is that there are species of salmon that return to their river of birth, right? To mate and lay eggs and all that. And a lot of people, as far as I understand, we don't really know how they know this, but it sounds very similar to me. Once again, I'm no expert. I'm going off on things that I can't explain.
Well, I think I get what you're saying, where it's just instinctual, kind of like perfect pitch.
Right.
It's just completely an instinct that I don't even know if they can really explain it. Because I know that relative pitch is really similar to perfect pitch, but it's learned. Like no matter how good you get with relative pitch, even if you can identify every single note perfectly, it's still relative because you had to learn it. It's not instinctual.
It's still an active process.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas perfect pitch isn't. It could not be anything else.
So I found this, and our listeners aren't going to be able to see it, but
let's see if I can describe what I'm looking at. There is a gentleman and a woman sitting in a corner booth of a restaurant.
Yeah.
Possibly like a cocktail bar or something like that. They look like they're dressed up. And the man is saying to the woman looks a little bit upset. And the man is saying, I never said I love you. I said I love you. Big difference.
Yeah. And so this is getting into what we were just talking about with prescriptivism. And they explain, I'm going to read what they say because it's great. What we have here is a distressing discussion between Wittgenstein and a more traditional philosopher. So they're saying Wittgenstein is the man and a more traditional philosopher is the woman, right? Who is identifiable by her classic string of pearls. Note that the traditionalist, or prescriptivist in our case, clearly finds the expressions I love you and I love ya equivalent.
Right.
Because you and ya are both referencing the exact same entity, right? Wittgenstein finds it necessary to correct her by explaining that the meaning of a word is determined by the rules for its use. Because of the two expressions, I love you and I love ya are used very differently in ordinary language, they have different meanings, thus very different social implications. And that's what we were just on, that you have these two schools of thought, essentially, which I'm not saying one of them is descriptivist and one of them is prescriptivist, because it's broader than that when we're talking about philosophy. You got essentially newer language philosophy and traditional language philosophy, and neither one of them can definitively be proven right at any point. And that's why they're poking fun at the whole thing, is because this is an argument that's been going on for literally thousands of years. You know, we've got Cicero, who's one of the, I don't even know if that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
Well, I know that's how we pronounce his name.
Oh.
But I don't know. I think
that's how I pronounce his name, so of course it's right.
I think he said his name was Cicero or something.
Oh, wow, okay.
That's how the Latin was pronounced at that point. But anyway, we've got him literally saying that Greek is the only language that you can use to express philosophy, and his own Latin, which is so vulgar and common, does not possess the words in order to adequately talk about philosophy. Now, the reason that's ironic to us when we hear it is because Latin is like the big language for English. You know, that's the
Right.
one where just like speaking words can literally summon demons, you know?
Right. Oh, no.
That's the big one for us.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where J.K. Rowling got the inspiration for 90% of her spells.
Right.
Literally Latin incantations
Yeah.
of like expecto patronum. That's straight Latin.
Yeah.
There's nothing else there. And that's so funny to me because Cicero is this like really, really smart philosopher, really great politician that we love, and people have loved him for a really long time. And he's like, my language is not good enough. And I feel like we feel that same way about our own language sometimes, where, oh man, my vulgar, slangy English is not stachit. Shoot. It's not, oh, that's it, sufficient. It's not sufficient enough for me to express what I'm trying to say. You know,
Interesting.
I need to switch into freaking King James Version English or Shakespearean English to really get into what I mean. And that's just not the case, because Cicero wrote in Latin and he wrote about philosophy and he did a really great job.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like it was impossible. He just felt like it was.
For sure. For sure. I really want to keep going on this point. Let's take a break real quick.
Cool.
And when we come back, we'll just jump right back into it.
Great.
So before we jump back into the conversation we were just having, I did want to go back because over the break, I looked at this New Zealand language. It wasn't Maori, was it?
No.
Okay. So what I see here is Kuk Thayore.
That's one of them, yeah.
That's one of them. Okay.
There, like I was saying, there are several that demonstrate this, and that's why it kind of lends more evidence to the theory, because it's not just one outlier.
Right. Okay. So for those of you listening at home, feel free to look that up. And it's spelled in a way that I would not have guessed. Is Kukthaayorre. I apologize.
And we're probably butchering the pronunciation.
Oh, no, absolutely. Being an English speaker, I don't have any better way of communicating that to you, but it seems very interesting. So feel free to do some looking into that. But I wanted to get back on, because you were talking about how you're like, oh, sometimes I feel like my language isn't good enough to explain what I'm thinking. And you know what's really funny is that, you mentioned that you went on a Mormon mission.
Yeah.
This is a very common thing for Mormon missionaries to say. They're like, oh, my mission language was just so much better at expressing these thoughts.
Well, it's not even better. It's just that I was better at expressing myself in them. You know, as a teenager, I never really had to express my actual thoughts. I could just repeat stuff that other people thought and say that's what I thought too.
Like your parents.
Like my parents, like freaking this book, like everything, you know? And so my mission language, Slovak, it's one that's really like dear to me, even though everything that I just said had kind of contradicted that. Like everything I said before the break, where language is not what's actually important. It's literally just the feelings that I have attached to it. It's pretty great. And I'm fairly decent at it. I mean, I teach it at university.
Right.
So I'm decent.
I would say, yeah, you're like, intermediate at the very least.
Something like that.
Yeah. So one of the things that you said though, when you're talking about English in particular, like, well, sometimes I feel like I need to be speaking like old English, like Shakespearean English to be able to say it in the right way. And I would probably agree with it. So I actually somewhat disagree with you about, that any language doesn't have the ability to express an idea.
Okay.
I think that there is a way to express an idea, but it depends on the context of what you're trying to say. But there are some ways that seem more elegant. I think that is a big factor in why people have a preference for one language or another.
Like more culturally elegant.
Yeah, I just mean like when you're talking about like Shakespearean.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When Shakespeare talks about like the ideas of love, the ideas of existence, and he talks about them in a way that feel romantic to us. The form kind of meets the function.
It does, yeah.
And it has a greater, it's like the same reason that poetry seems so impactful. It rhymes, therefore it must be true kind of thing,
Thank you, Robert Frost and all other poets.
Wait, there's other poets besides Robert Frost?
We actually go over that a little bit in my class when we talk about Hviezdoslav, which I'm not expecting anyone to know who he is. He's like the Slovak version of Shakespeare, but because he was Hungarian, he like picked this pseudonym. Hviezdoslav is like the glory of the stars. That's how that translates.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he picked like a pretty prideful name.
My name is God.
Yeah, seriously. But we talk about the fact that there's nothing that you quote unquote can't translate between languages. And I'll give you an example of this. So, niech sa páči is this really, really common thing that Slovaks say. It means, may it please, or let it please itself, or something along those lines.
Let it please itself.
Yeah, and that's like, it is the translation, and it is a correct translation. However, both of us have been translators before.
Yeah.
We both know that our cultural attachment to that phrase in English is like at a freaking zero.
Yeah.
So there's no cultural meaning behind it. It means nothing. Like if I were to say that to someone on the street, because of that cultural sort of paradigm that we're working with, they won't understand what I'm talking about because they don't have the background knowledge for it. They don't have the tradition for it. They have no feelings attached to it.
Right. It's the concept of translation fluency.
Yeah. So that's a case where the form, even though it's like I translated it, may it please itself, that's kind of older English.
Yeah.
The form did not meet the function.
Right.
It couldn't meet the function because it's lacking in that cultural background side.
Yeah. I have a friend, as an example of a very easy example. I have a friend who, likes the joke, what's up? The sky, right?
Oh, geez.
Very simple joke,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's a great one.
And so she has some Hispanic coworkers, and they say, ¿qué tal? And she knows that ¿qué tal means what's up. Mm-hmm. So she says, el cielo, the sky. Mm-hmm. And nobody gets it.
Of course not.
Because ¿qué tal doesn't mean what's up. So if you translate for fluency, if you translate for something that makes sense culturally, mm-hmm. it means what's up because it's very informal and it's mm-hmm. short and sweet and snappy, right?
But it does not mean what is literally above.
Yeah,
you.
no, ¿qué tal is like more like what is, like what's going, what's,
yeah,
like what about it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I said like, hey, what about it? And you said the ceiling, the sky or the ceiling, it's like, what?
That doesn't make any sense.
No sense at all, right? But yeah, I personally, my translation philosophy is that fluency is what you should be aiming for. And so even if you completely bastardize what was actually said, if you say something that has the same impact on a person emotionally or message-wise, I think that's a better translation.
And I have a fantastic example of that because that's something that we really do agree on. I agree on everything. Yeah. I agree with everything you just said.
Great.
I worked as a translator in Russia for a little while, and there was this one phrase that I remember specifically.
Touchdown.
No.
Sorry, but that's like a pretty good guess, right?
It is a great guess. This specific phrase, we were translating from Russian into English, as is kind of the international standard. Like that's my native language, so I translate into it most of the time.
Okay.
The phrase we were translating is "dushevny chuvak." Dushevny chuvak. And several natives and several non-natives, myself included, all got in an argument about how we should be translating this. Because dusha means soul. So dushevny chuvak, and chuvak is like a guy. And this is for an advertisement, so we're trying to make it, put a positive connotation on it the same way that there is one in Russian. And so some people were saying it should be cool dude. Some people were saying it should be, what was the one there was one weird one, but it was pretty literal.
Okay.
And so they were getting all mad that we were doing, like you were saying, we were bastardizing the Russian. It was a spirited dude.
So my thing is like, if you're interpreting and you need to include a translator's note, you're doing a bad job.
Yeah, really. No, this was straight up translation. We're just translating it. But like, oh my gosh, spirited dude does not have any cultural value to any English speakers anywhere. It sounds like Hardy Boys almost.
Okay.
You know, like a spirited chap. Freaking Chet driving his jalopy with Frank and Joe.
I would understand that you were trying to say something like relatable, and it would be like, how's it going, my fellow kids?
Yeah, exactly. Could write a Saturday Night Live script with that.
Yeah.
But we eventually settled on the translation Mad Lad because...
Oh, no, you didn't.
We did.
Okay.
Because whether you're UK or American, like that has kind of almost the same, connotation where it's just a guy that doesn't care about what other people think of him. He's going to do what he's going to do because he wants to do it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you could have went with Troubadour, but that would have been a little dated.
Would have been really dated. Really dated, and I think that French has like kind of a bad connotation in English.
Oh, maybe that's right.
Generally, I don't agree with it, but I feel like that's the vibe I get.
I mean, I don't have that vibe, but I understand that you were translating in the moment, and that's up to you to make that decision. How do you do, fellow troubadours?
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's great, man.
So let me get to, this is one of my favorite linguistic philosophers. His name's William James.
Okay. I've heard that name, but the
a lot
philosophy...
of people should have heard his name. So he describes a spectrum of thinking, and he's following up on a non-linguistic philosopher who his philosophy kind of encapsulated language anyway, just in the nature of it. Charles Peirce, who he's essentially the father of semiotics.
Semiotics, and for those at home...
Semiotics is the process by which we create meaning in anything, whether that's a word or a picture or a road sign or, you know, whatever. If there is something that's possible for us to create meaning out of it, this studies the process of how we did it.
I'm most familiar with semiotics with symbols having real meaning. So like street signs, like you said, or emojis.
Or white space on a website. You know, it's pointing to where you should be looking or drawing attention to the fact that there's nothing there, you know. That has meaning just as much as the actual words do. Very cool. Yeah, it's fantastic. But so William James studied Peirce, and he came up with kind of a pragmatic philosophy. He describes a spectrum for how we think, ranging from tender-minded to tough-minded. And tender-minded philosophers maintain that vague natural languages have an advantage over mathematics because they give us more wiggle room. Essentially, philosophers for a long time have argued about what's the best way to present truth. And so here's the background to that. Should we present truth through mathematics the way that Einstein did with like E equals mc squared, or should we present it in a more verbose way, saying that like time is relative, and so just because you are comprehending, there it is again. Third time's the charm.
Just backhanded the microphone.
So time is relative. So just because you're comprehending time in a certain way doesn't mean that everyone else is comprehending it the same way as you, especially where the speed of light is concerned, where people can actually experience the same moment at different moments, which is weird, but you know, that's what the argument is. Like, was it better to just explain that through your little equation that can make people sound smart, or was it better to explain it in the way that I just did?
Is a proof an explanation?
It should be. No, it shouldn't be. I don't know what I'm saying there.
That's okay. I might follow up on that in a minute, but finish your thought first.
So I wanted to get to this joke about. So this is a joke making fun of the idea that language is better than mathematics for presenting ideas. Okay. So this is an 80-year-old woman who bursts into the men's day room at the retirement home. She holds her clenched fist in the air and announces, "Anyone who can guess what I have in my hand can have sex with me tonight." And an old man in the back shouts, "An elephant." And the lady thinks for a moment and says, "Close enough." Right?
Yeah. No, you got me completely. I was not expecting.
And it really puts the question out there that, like, is it better? Because that is extending wiggle room far past the amount that a normal person would probably give it. But it's still like maybe a believable situation. I like that. So tough-minded philosophers of language, they will probably give her that wiggle room, but they'll also point to, like you were saying before, prescriptivists generally say that language has sort of iterations or versions. You know, we might be in version 2.3 of English right now.
Yeah. And
in a couple of years, we might advance to version 2.4, right? That's kind of how it works. And so during her portion of when language was, probably the thing in her hand and an elephant were completely different. And so probably that's not big enough wiggle room, right? So here's a joke that's illustrating the opposite side of it, that meanings are static, essentially. And it starts with the background of perhaps an artificial language could have averted the following tragedy. So a 911 dispatcher receives a panicky call from a hunter. I've just come across a blood-stained body in the woods. It's a man and I think he's dead. What should I do? The dispatcher calmly replies, it's going to be all right, sir. Just follow my instructions. The first thing is to put the phone down and make sure he's dead. There's silence on the phone, followed by the sound of a gunshot. The man returns. Okay, now what do I do? And I'm going to explain the joke so it's not funny, but to make sure of something has a specific meaning in one context, like you need to verify. Be 100% that this is the way things are. And so the man took that as a directive saying, you need to kill him if he's not already dead, which he did. Yeah. You know, and so that's kind of playing on the idea that all words should have one meaning, and that meaning shouldn't change between contexts. The way that tough-minded, quote unquote, that's how William James would have described them, tough-minded linguistic philosophers. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty darn funny.
It is.
So you and I have a strong background, not only in like the translation aspect of linguistics or the formal or the philosophy, but actually in computational linguistics and natural language processing. From what I can see, a lot of people in our field are trying to reduce language to mathematical formulae, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I'm working on a project right now that does that exactly. We're reducing every single word in this huge database that we have constructed. Every single word is getting assigned an n-dimensional vector. So it's less than even a formula. It's just one string of numbers in a one-dimensional matrix.
Right. For the people at home, he just said a lot of complicated stuff.
Yeah, like you need a background in linear algebra just to talk about it, and that's been hard to. I'd imagine it was hard for you as well.
It was very hard for me.
Maybe it's just me. To me, that's hard, and so just talking about it is ridiculous. But you nailed it on the head. We're trying to represent language with math, which kind of brings these two fields together, or both sides of that argument of like, is math better or language better? Why not both? You know. ¿Por qué no los dos? The little girl with the tacos.
I mean, so, and maybe I've hinted enough that you can see my inclinations here, but in your opinion, what is a better method for representing or talking about the truth?
That's really hard. And I actually don't know what your inclinations are. Oh. But to me, I am very familiar with the problems that are coming up with this right now, like in my project and in the field. And it's exactly what we ran across in that joke, you know, where words have multiple meanings, and between languages, those meanings don't always line up In fact, the majority of the time, they don't actually completely line up. And I'll give you a good example of what I'm talking about with this, or like why I think it's asking the wrong question almost. The English language has been fairly fluid up until the colonization of America. And actually something interesting that I just learned a little while ago is before the Revolutionary War, and this is something that anyone can Google, but I just didn't know it before. Before the Revolutionary War, it was a universally accepted fact that Americans spoke better English than British people did.
Still a fact.
Still a fact. I don't know how many people would agree with that anymore, including Americans.
Right.
Like whether or not it's true. And but anyway, so English has been fairly fluid up until that stopped being a universally accepted fact, whether or not it was still a fact, you know? As soon as people started not accepting it, it started to, American English, it didn't try to be more static. Specifically, New Englanders tried to keep it more static. And, oh shoot, I forgot where I was going with this.
But that makes sense though, because that's where the separation from, Britain,
the motherland.
Where all of that kind of originated. And so there was a sense of identity being made as Americans, right?
Where was I going with this? What did I say before? I'm really sorry.
You were just talking about English being very fluid prior to this moment in time that you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. I remember exactly what I was going up to. So essentially what happens is we start getting in all sorts of arguments about how things are spelled, about what punctuation we should be using, about everything that you can possibly imagine in language.
And honestly, thank God for that, because when we look back at like the different symbols that they were using for different letters that now we all know what they are, back then they had no idea what they were doing. Oh,
yeah. It's one of my favorite things to go and look at Chaucer. I mean, that's a super nerdy thing to say. I'm not reading his stuff per se. I'm actually just looking at how he spells his words and how absolutely inconsistent it was.
Yeah.
He used different spellings for the same words all the time. And yet, even now, he's regarded as like really, really good at English. And he spoke really, really fine English. So it's leading up to the invention of the computer with Turing and everything that went on after him. We have this great device that essentially forces us to be static in our punctuation and our letters and the way that we write them. That's the keyboard.
Right.
We've defined a specific number of keys, and we've even mapped them out in code. First in, was it ASCII?
Yeah.
And then Unicode, and then UTF-8. Am I getting that right?
Well, UTF-8 is Unicode.
Yeah, but it's a hack of Unicode.
Sure.
So, that essentially made it so that as far as writing goes, all of a sudden we weren't able to change things, or so we thought. Right? Now we have these fantastic inflections that have come about just in the symbols that we use. A lot of people call them emojis.
Right.
I think that's pretty much universal. Everyone calls them emojis.
Right.
You have emojis that are just the little characters, like you can do colon, dash, and parentheses.
Right.
And this is one of the funny things I was talking about with my little sister a couple of weeks ago. If you use that instead of like the Apple one or the Samsung one, like whatever type of phone you have, if you specifically spell it out instead of using the yellow preloaded one,
right,
that can be considered like offensive or threatening now.
Really?
Like that's been inflected onto that. Yeah, that like, I don't know, if you put that there and you took the time to actually write it all out instead of using that, it's almost like like that fake smile.
I didn't
of
even
like,
know
I'm
this.
gonna kill you kind of thing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And there's like 3 different just base smile emojis too. And I'm like, which one of these is the happiest?
Because all of them are now taking on meaning. Yeah. And that's what I love is that even though we confined our alphabet, we confined our letters, we're inflecting things not just with punctuation, we're also inflecting it with spelling, like thick with 2 C's or thick with 2 Q's.
Right.
Like the number of C's that you put on there actually carries different meanings, or the number of Q's, or, hot with a HAWT instead of HOT. That's a little older, but it's the same idea, where because we've confined ourselves to this alphabet, that doesn't stop us from innovating with the language. And that's just something that I love about language. And I'm the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people have thought, and probably still think, that because we've gotten this static or more static-ish language currently, we're able to then represent it better in code and with vectors and stuff.
Sure.
But it's continued to change outside of what we're actually using to represent it in those vectors. And so we still can't grab the whole meaning. And that's a problem that we're going to be trying to solve, I think, we're still going to be trying to solve it in about 50 years, I bet.
So what I think of when you tell me this is like, the systems that we use for delivering those symbols, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unicode. And then you talked about how like UTF-8 is kind of a hack of Unicode to deliver a more efficient set of these symbols. Like I think
it's just more robust. You're able to change things a lot faster. It's not even more efficient. It's just able to cope with change better.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you're right. But like these systems are made to be more efficient. Like we think you're going to need these characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've made these really accessible for you. And then if you need more, then you can, make whatever changes you need to get access to more of them. But as Unicode's like, we think that you use these characters a lot. We're like, oh, you think that? Fine, I'm going to use something else because you've tried to impose an identity upon me. And because of that, I now want to emerge as something else.
Isn't that so funny?
I think it's cool.
They actually go over exactly that in the book. Let me see if I can find where it is. Oh, actually, let me read this first. This is the Dimitri and Tasso conversation wrapping up the chapter on linguistic philosophy. Okay. So this clarifies everything we've been talking about, says Dimitri. Tasso says, in what way, Dimitri? What you call philosophy, I call a joke. Isn't that great?
What you call life, I call a joke.
Exactly. So they talk about this, how this is when they're talking about Hegel and Kierkegaard. Here it is. So exactly what you were just saying about how when we impose an identity on something, all of a sudden, a lot of the time, the first instinct is to break out of that identity.
I just want anything other than for you to know what I am.
Yeah, exactly. I actually heard a quote once that was, if you ever want people to really like and respect you, never tell them about who they really are.
Yikes.
Isn't that nuts? This is kind of sad about it. But here's this fantastic joke. This is, again, in reference to Hegel and Kierkegaard, two really famous philosophers who are especially Hegel is really famous for being really hard to understand. Like most people don't understand him even after having read him several times. But here's the joke. 2 cows are standing in a field. One says to the other, "What do you think about this mad cow disease?" "What do I care?" says the other. "I'm a helicopter."
Oh, no. I'm surprised that neither of them said moo, to be honest.
Yeah, seriously. Or one of my best friend's favorite joke when we were in high school was, why did the plane crash? Because the pilot was a loaf of bread.
I refuse to laugh.
It's just dumb.
It's just
dumb, but I love how it illustrates exactly what we're talking about, where we have constructed this situation where, the plane crashed. Any number of things could have gone wrong, and like 99.9 repeating % of those are like really serious bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you immediately just subvert all expectations and go to something that could not have ever happened. Like, how did the plane take off? The pilot's a freaking loaf of bread. How did that happen? It can't.
It's like Inception, where he's like, how did we get here? Do you remember how we got here? And then you realize it was all a dream.
And the joke's a dream too,
Yeah. So, okay. So we've talked about
a lot of stuff.
You've mostly talked about these jokes, which are, I was going to say hilarious, but to be honest, I haven't gotten most of them.
Yeah. And
because they're not actually jokes. Like the joke is that they're not jokes, you know, they kind of outline the chapter in this kind of meta unfamiliar way.
Actually, there's a whole chapter about that, meta philosophy.
Oh, no.
It's the last chapter.
No. Let's not go there. No, it's been a lot of fun. But the question I have for you is like, you know, you've shared a bunch of these jokes and that's great. My question is, what's a part of the book that you love that's not a joke?
That's not a joke?
That's not one of these jokes that they've inserted. Like, what's a part of the book that meant a lot to you that wasn't framed as this, hey guys, we're making a joke?
Dang, that's a really hard question, because I don't know that there's any portion of the book that's not framed as a joke.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? I can think about, let me see if I can find this. Yeah. So they have this fantastic summary at the end. They've got this timeline of of actual philosophy.
Yeah.
So they go through every philosophy that they mention in the book, and they give you not just where it came from and who made it, but they give you a time. So you can let me explain why this means more to me than I don't know. When you ask what means a lot to you, I don't normally think of a timeline, but for me that was really influential to see it all laid out, because it made me start thinking of other things being laid out in time. And it, especially reading through it, they have a little description, just a mini description, because you've already read the book, you know, this is way at the end. They have a mini description just reminding you of what this was. And you can kind of clearly see how one idea led into another idea, and that led into another one. And you can see the progression of it. That's something that has really influenced the way that I think about not just time necessarily, but historical events. You know, there's a really famous one that I'm sure that everyone has heard before, but I'm going to say it anyway, where you think about Jesus, and he lived closer to our day, like 2020 years, right, approximately. He lives closer to our day than he lived to the building of the pyramids. Okay. Like 5000 BC. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's nuts, but it kind of puts things into perspective of really how far away are those pyramids? Right. You know, how big of an accomplishment was that? Because it's before the crane was invented. Right. You know, the Greeks made that. It's before all of these amazing things that we have made to make moving gigantic limestone blocks easier. Yeah. They didn't have it. No. They just depended on aliens and the History Channel. Right, yeah. Whatever that guy's name is. Yeah. But so that's what's meant probably the most to me that wasn't a joke in the book, is just really for the first time outside of school. Because, you know, when we go to school, we kind of tend to compartmentalize things. At least I did. I compartmentalize everything. Yeah. So. I know that I did that. I would go into history class and we would learn about, you know, the American Revolution. And then I would go into my English class and we would read a book that was published right before the American Revolution. And I would be like, oh, that's a nice book. And not one single cell in my whole body had the thought, maybe that book was read by the founding fathers and maybe some ideas from it helped shape our country or anything like that. Even though the timeline clearly makes sense, I just didn't think of it that way because nobody sat down and showed me, this is when this happened. This is when this happened. You know, maybe there's a slight correlation. Or a very strong one. Like in the case of John Locke, you know, we read John Locke in high school. Or Adam Smith with the invisible hand. We read that one in high school too. We read that one in college. These are both people that I didn't even know about until college. So yeah. I mean, I don't think very many people do figure it out, but I remember learning about them in high school and being like, oh, that's cool. I don't really care about, thinking the next thought.
A dead guy. Sure. Thanks.
Yeah, really. And then I get to college and somebody laid it out for me exactly like this book did with philosophy. Like, this happened. Literally, we know that the founding fathers did read these things and they were influenced by them. And we even get some of the same language appearing in our Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Like John Locke said, life, liberty, and property. Declaration of Independence is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So like, they clearly took influence from him.
Yeah.
And he clearly took influence from philosophers of his day. And that's why that means a lot to me, is it provides essentially the framework for all of these connections. I'm realizing I'm saying essentially a lot. I never thought that I said that word very much, but now it's coming up every sentence. So it's providing this framework for us to connect ideas and actually get a much better understanding of what was going on and what might have been going through their heads.
Right.
Why were they making the decisions they were making?
I think that's really important. Like the kind of the first cause. So it's not so much what you do, but the why you're doing it, or what is it that's compelling you to do it.
What led to that? Yeah.
Yeah. And if you can get to that, you might get to something a little bit more foundational or personal or something with a greater impact, That's actually something that one of the jokes in this book influenced me towards. And I'm not going to share I don't remember where the joke is right at this moment. Sure.
And I don't want to try to look for it. And I don't remember the joke well enough. But I remember when it was talking about ex nihilo versus whatever the opposite of that, creationism in philosophy of religion. It talked a bit about context. And there were
that's really important for the even the idea of I would have pronounced that ex nihilo.
Ex nihilo.
So maybe I'm
probably
wrong. I don't
pronouncing
know.
it wrong. That's great.
But even that concept, even though it's out of nothing, there is still a something from which nothing exists.
There was a turtle holding it all up.
Well, and maybe I'm kind of conflating philosophers here, right? But there was this idea of a void, but the void was the thing in which all stuff was, and there could be places in the void in which there was no stuff.
Yeah.
Like the first atomists, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so like ex nihilo didn't necessarily mean out of nothing, but out of formlessness, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's exactly what I'm kind of going for, is
right.
you have to provide a framework, or you have to provide context to something. I actually consider it disingenuous to remove the context from anything.
Sure,
if you're in a court situation and somebody robbed a bank, I feel like it is intellectually dishonest to convict him and give him a sentence without understanding the why and without getting the events that led up to it,
I agree. If he's guilty, he's still guilty.
Yeah, no, it's not going to change the guilt, but it can change the sentence. And that's what I'm hoping to get at here. Or a more serious example, like if somebody was murdered, understanding the murder is important. Was it in a war between two countries? Is because it's essentially still a murder, but I mean, they, in that situation, have the authority to commit. I'm doing air quotes here, because they have the authority to commit it because they're on a mission for their country to protect other people. Like, that's the context of it. Or was it like a serial killer? Or was it like was it a cop in the line of duty? Or was it, a drug dealer or something? I feel like that's a really great example of what I'm talking about, where this book, through its jokes, influenced me to believe that removing context from things makes it so you don't actually understand the thing you're talking about. And in a court situation, that means you can assign the wrong punishment. In a regular situation, that could mean that you assign not a punishment, but you can assign the wrong judgment.
Sure.
I
mean, I'm totally on board with everything you've said, especially when you because at first I was like, no, I think I'm not following on the sentencing thing, because if he's still guilty, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, Right. So he's still guilty, but the punishment has to be fitting of the crime within the context. So he still gets the whatever the associate or what
whatever the
he still gets a punishment,
agreed upon punishment for that is.
Right, but there even within the category of punishment, there's different levels based on the context of what he did. And so I'm totally on board. And I apologize for cutting you off because like you just got me so excited when you're like, oh, like the context of ex nihilo and creationism. I just got so excited because I mean I'm already on board with you. So like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. There's probably somebody listening that's like, these guys are both idiots. But
sometimes I think that too. I am
that we're both idiots.
Well, not you, but yeah, that's essentially what I was saying, where like in order to understand either of those points of view, whether you're a creationist, whether you're ex nihilo, whether you're scientific method, whether it's the Big Bang, whatever, like where did we come from? The context actually is important. You know, your context is important for why you've accepted what you believe. And that's what I love. That's what I want to really delve into. And
in spite of the fact that you and I are, for example, across the table from each other, across the aisle, we stand on different sides of an argument, we have way more in common in how we got to those different sides. The opinion doesn't matter so much as how we got there. And the thing is, we both went on a journey to get to a place.
And the real treasure was the journey.
All along. The real treasure were the friends we made along the way, right? No, that's... I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think this is important. It's relatable. And everybody goes through it.
Yeah. That, I don't know. That's kind of exactly what college was for me. And I feel like the book... Because I got home and I immediately went to college.
Yeah.
So I got home from my mission and I immediately went to college. So I was reading this book during my first semester at college, and I was taking this class that kind of teaches you how to be a good citizen in America, or like a responsible citizen.
Wait, are you talking about
American Heritage?
I loved that class.
It was a great class.
Fantastic. Who'd you have it with?
I had it. I think his last name is Peterson. Is the teacher, and something I remember about him that's not super nice and also not super related, but I just remember him talking about his PhD a lot. Like pretty much every single class he would mention that he had a PhD. He wouldn't necessarily talk about what that meant for the class, just that he had one.
Believe me, guys, I have a PhD.
Yeah, really.
Weird flex, but you know.
Whatever,
okay,
man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carry on.
And but something I remember about that class, especially with reading this book, and at the same time I was playing Assassin's Creed 3, which is probably one of the big reasons why I passed that class. Honestly, like Ubisoft has done a fantastic job of making real, believable experiences, and they've really done their research.
I've loved their games.
Yeah. So the class combined with the book, they kind of associate the idea of learning, not just how to learn, but learning how to love learning.
Yeah.
And learning that, you know, things really do have meaning. You know, as a teenager, I feel like everybody goes, maybe not everybody, but I went through the phase of, for a little while, like if something was just a tradition or like a social construct or something, I was like, I don't want any part of that. And I kind of learned that you need to learn that context before you can just make judgments about things, even if it's just a tradition. You know, I've heard there's this Instagram quote floating around that tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. That's not actually true. You know, there's a reason that people
peer pressure from alive people.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason that tradition never came to be. You know, we have, like we talked a little bit earlier, we have this tradition in American English of really putting Latin on a pedestal. And understanding the context of why that came to be allows me to actually vehemently disagree with that and have real reasons for disagreeing with it.
Right.
Because when English was going through its little pseudo codification at the turn of the 20th century, the people that considered themselves the ones who were wise enough to decide the future of English, basically picked between pseudo-Latin grammar, not even real Latin grammar, but constructed Latin grammar based on the way that they felt like Latin should be, and French grammar. So that's, for example, the reason that we don't usually use double negatives in English. They just came up with that because they liked the pseudo-Latin grammar that they made up more than the French grammar.
Huh, that makes sense.
No, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, but at the same time, we don't not use double negatives in English.
Yeah, exactly. I heard this really great quote from my mother-in-law over Christmas where she said, it's not that she didn't not want to go.
Oh, no.
It's that she didn't want to not go.
See, English is absolutely elegant. I don't know what you were talking about earlier. That was incredible.
Yeah, and it's weird that both of those sentences or both of those clauses use a double negative, and they clearly have different meanings. And I don't think that anyone would actually think that I'm not a native speaker or that I was speaking incorrectly by quoting her on that.
Yeah, because you almost need to be a native level speaker to be able to even understand that concept. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, there you have it. So would you say that like learning to love learning has been kind of the biggest impact that this book has had on you?
Yeah, and it's hard to attribute all of that to the book, obviously, but it definitely helped in my journey to get there. And I would agree, that's the biggest effect that the book has helped put on me, is just learning to love learning and learning to love understanding different points of view, even if I don't agree with them.
Yeah.
And that's happy for me. That has allowed me to get along with a lot of people that I might not have gotten along with otherwise if I were carrying like certain prejudices or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great. I think that is a wonderful thing to get out of a book.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions that I always ask.
Great.
Every episode, every guest. And the first one is, if you had to rate Plato and a platypus walk into a bar, which I have been saying incorrectly because I've been leaving out the walk into a bar part the whole episode.
That's fine.
If you had to rate that compared to other works of literature that have been written, what rating would you give the book?
Dang, I've been thinking about this the whole time because you told me beforehand that you were going to ask this. So this is what you always ask. And I haven't come up with like a good, funny rating system because the book deserves a funny rating, but I just don't have it. And so I'm going to give it like an 8.5 out of 10.
Okay.
The reason being that it is really short. And so they don't actually explain all of the philosophy that they mention in depth. So you can read this whole book and you'll get a nice general picture of each of these philosophies, but you're going to have to do your own research beyond that in order to actually get any of it, in order to actually understand what was going on or who these people are.
Gotcha. So it seems like what you're saying is that they're losing 1.5 because they didn't ever explain what happens after Plato and the platypus walk into the bar.
Right. You never get the punchline.
It's really too bad because they had something good going.
They don't explain why Plato was going to the bar or how he met the platypus.
Right.
What drinks they ordered, or even if they did, and I'm getting a little too far into that. It's not funny anymore. But they don't delve into the nitty gritty of all of this. And so it's not the same as taking like a philosophy 101 class, or maybe it is the same as taking a philosophy 101 class where you really aren't delving into all of the stuff that you need to know for the context of why these philosophers thought the way they did.
Sure.
You'll probably end up at the end of the book thinking, oh man, all philosophies are wrong, or at least all philosophies are funny.
No, all people are wrong. It sounds like is one of the takeaways from the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like South Park or Family Guy where there's no like safe zone. There's no one that doesn't get made fun of.
Oh gosh. Thinking about those guys, man.
Or Rick and Morty. That's another great one. There's no off limits portion of this for who we're going to make fun of.
Makes sense. It does. All right. So the second question I always ask is, who would you recommend this book to?
That's a great one. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who has graduated high school.
Okay.
Which is funny because the first two times that I read this were before and during high school. And that's actually the reason that I'm saying that. I don't feel like you can really understand this book or its implications until after you've hit a certain level of maturity.
Okay.
And after you've hit a certain point of world experience, you know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, dang, that was broader than I meant it to be. I would recommend this book mostly to people that would like to know how to think, but are not quite there yet.
Okay.
And that's a little bit vague, but that's why it had such an effect on me, is I got to read the words of some people who clearly did know how to think deeply, and they knew how to present material in like really complex, hard material in a nice, small package.
Right.
And that's something that I wish that I was better at, and that's something that I probably could have learned from the book that I still haven't. That's sure. But that's it. If you would like to learn how to think and you have the gumption to recognize that currently you do not know how to think very well, read the book.
I might even suggest that if you would like to think that you know how to think, right? Those who would like to.
Yeah, seriously. Because I'm not claiming that I know now, but I have at least a picture of how one could.
Sure. Fantastic. Well, it has been so wonderful to have you on. It's looking like it's going to be the longest episode that we've had so far on the show, which is great. I love it. I love hearing what kinds of books, what kinds of topics make people think, inspire people to do great things in life. So for those of you listening at home, if you would like to connect with the podcast, you can find the Twitter account at Left on Red Books, Instagram at Left on Red Books Podcast, and find us in other places as well. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute blast.
You're welcome.
And thank you for telling me about your favorite book.
Great.